I woke up at 3:17 a.m. because I heard breathing outside my bedroom window. Slow, measured, too close to be the wind. I lay still, counting each inhale that wasn't mine, staring at the faint reflection of the glass. Whoever it was stood exactly where the moonlight couldn't reach. The house sat alone on Black Hollow Road, 3 miles outside Ridgewood, Oregon. No neighbors, no traffic at night. When I leaned closer to the window, the breathing stopped instantly, like whoever stood there knew the sound of my movement as well as I did. I waited 10 minutes before getting up. When I finally pulled the curtain aside, the yard was empty, but the grass beneath the window was flattened, pressed down in a wide oval, as if someone had stood there for a long time, long enough to be comfortable. The next night, it happened again. Same time. 3:17 a.m. This time, I didn't move. I listened. The breathing came through the thin glass, steady and patient, as if the person outside wasn't afraid of being caught. By the third night, I noticed something worse. The back gate, which I always locked before bed, was open in the morning. Not broken. Opened cleanly, like someone who already knew the latch. I asked Mark Densley, the gas station clerk in Ridgewood, if anyone used to live on my land. He froze when I gave him the address. Then he told me the name Caleb Rourke and said no one talked about him anymore. That night, I set a camera facing the yard. At 3:17 a.m., the feed showed a man standing perfectly still beneath my window. Older, thin, wearing a jacket that didn't belong to this decade. He stared straight at the glass. When I checked the footage in the morning, the file was gone. The camera was still running, and muddy footprints led from the window to the back door. Inside, my name is Elias Crowe, and this happened after I moved into an abandoned house on the edge of Ridgewood, Oregon. I came here looking for quiet. I didn't know I was stepping into someone else's routine. Before this gets deeper, make sure you subscribe to the channel. These stories come straight, without filters, and you won't want to miss what happens next. If you're watching right now, comment where you're watching from. City, town, country. I read them all, and it helps more than you think. Nothing in this story is exaggerated. Names, locations, times, all real. What I didn't understand then was that the house had a memory, and someone was still living inside it. What started at 3:17 a.m. wasn't random. It was scheduled. And once you realize that, sleep becomes impossible. Now let me tell you how it really began. My name is Elias Crowe, and I moved to Black Hollow Road, just outside Ridgewood, Oregon, because I wanted isolation. No neighbors, no noise, just trees, fog, and a house that had been empty for years. I believed distance was safety. I was wrong. The house belonged to the Rourke property. Abandoned after a quiet foreclosure no one liked to talk about. Locals avoided the place. They didn't warn me directly. They never do. They just paused when I mentioned the address and changed the subject. The first nights were quiet. Too quiet. Then the pattern began. Same time, same sound. 3:17 a.m. Every detail mattered after that. Doors, windows, the ground outside my bedroom. This wasn't fear. It was awareness. Before I continue, subscribe to the channel. These stories don't drift. They escalate. And what happened in that house didn't end when the sun came up. Also, comment where you're watching from. City or small town, country or countryside. You'd be surprised how often places like yours connect to stories like this. What you're about to hear isn't about ghosts or imagination. It's about territory, memory, and a man who never accepted that the house was no longer his. I didn't unpack everything the first night. I left most of my boxes stacked in the living room, like I wasn't sure I'd stay. The house on Black Hollow Road smelled old, dust, cold wood, and something metallic I couldn't place. I locked every door, checked every window, and still slept lightly, waking at every sound the forest made around Ridgewood. The first time I woke at 3:17 a.m., there was no breathing, just silence so thick it felt intentional. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to my own pulse, waiting for something to explain why my eyes had snapped open at that exact minute. Nothing happened. I convinced myself it was stress. Moving does that to you. The second night, the sound came with purpose. A slow inhale, a long exhale, right outside my bedroom window. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The rhythm stayed steady, like whoever stood there wasn't worried about being heard. That was the part that scared me most. My bedroom faced the tree line. No porch, no walkway, just dirt and weeds that sloped down toward the old fence. When I finally sat up in bed, the breathing stopped instantly. Not faded. Stopped, like someone holding their breath because they knew I was awake. At sunrise, I went outside with a flashlight and a tire iron in my hand. The ground beneath the window was disturbed, not trampled, pressed down. A wide, shallow impression, heels dug in. Someone had stood there long enough to settle their weight into the soil. I followed the marks to the fence. They ended cleanly, like the person had vanished. I drove into town that morning and stopped at Densley's Fuel and Mart, the only gas station in Ridgewood. Mark Densley rang me up without looking at my face until I mentioned Black Hollow Road. His hands slowed, his eyes lifted. He asked which house. When I told him, his mouth tightened. He said nothing else. That night, I left the porch light on. I checked the locks twice. At 3:17 a.m., the breathing returned. Closer this time, not just outside the window, right beneath it. I could hear fabric shift, a jacket, a sleeve brushing wood. Whoever it was leaned in, like they were trying to smell the room. I grabbed my phone and turned on the camera, holding it up to the glass. The light flashed once. The breathing stopped. When I pulled the curtain back, I saw the outline of a man retreating into the trees. Tall, slightly hunched, moving like someone who knew exactly where the roots were. In the morning, my back gate was open. I never leave it unlocked. The latch wasn't forced. It was used. I found footprints in the mud leading straight to the back door, then circling the house once before stopping beneath my bedroom window again. That wasn't curiosity. That was inspection. I installed a motion camera that afternoon, mounted low, angled toward the yard. I tested it twice. It worked. That night, I sat awake, waiting. At 3:17 a.m., the alert buzzed. The screen showed a man standing still beneath my window, staring directly into the camera like he knew where it was. The next morning, the footage was gone. The camera was still powered, still aimed correctly, but the memory card was missing. On the porch, carved lightly into the wood with something sharp, was a single name I hadn't heard spoken out loud yet. Rourke. I didn't sleep after finding the name carved into the porch. I sat at the kitchen table until sunrise, a mug of cold coffee in my hands, staring at the back door. The house made its usual sounds, wood contracting, pipes ticking, but now every noise felt rehearsed, like the place was performing for someone who already knew the script. By morning, I drove straight into Ridgewood and went back to Densley's Fuel and Mart. Mark was restocking shelves when I walked in. I didn't ease into it. I asked him who Caleb Rourke was. He didn't answer right away. He locked the front door, flipped the sign to back in 5, and told me to lower my voice. Mark said Rourke built that house himself in the late 80s. Lived there alone after his wife died. No kids, no close family. When the bank took the property, Rourke refused to leave. Sheriff Tom Halverson had to remove him personally. Mark said Rourke stood on the porch and kept repeating that the land didn't belong to the county. It belonged to him. Always had. I asked what happened to him. Mark shrugged once, sharp and uncomfortable. Said Rourke disappeared a few years after that. Some folks claimed he moved east. Others said he never left the woods. Mark wouldn't meet my eyes when he said that last part. On the way back to Black Hollow Road, I noticed something I hadn't before. Old trail markers nailed to trees near my property line. Faded red paint. Almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. Someone had been navigating that land long before I arrived. Someone who didn't need paths. That afternoon, I searched the house top to bottom. I found scratches on the inside of the attic hatch. Deep ones, not from animals, from fingernails. In the crawl space beneath the floor, I found a flattened sleeping mat and a rusted lantern. Someone had been inside the house without me knowing. Recently. That night, I didn't turn the lights off. I sat on the bed fully dressed, a crowbar beside me, the camera feed open on my phone. The house stayed quiet until 3:17 a.m. on the dot. The breathing didn't come from outside this time. It came from the hallway. Slow, careful, controlled. I held my breath and listened. The sound moved closer, stopping just outside my bedroom door. I could see the shadow beneath it. 1 foot angled inward, like the person knew how the door would swing. My phone vibrated with a motion alert from the yard camera. The feed showed the man standing beneath my window again. Same jacket, same posture, completely still. But that was impossible. I could hear him in the hallway. I understood then that he wasn't pacing. He wasn't searching. He was placing himself where he needed to be. The doorknob turned slightly, not enough to open, just enough to test it. I stepped back, raised the crowbar, and shouted that I had a weapon. The breathing stopped. The shadow withdrew. A second later, the back door slammed shut. When I checked the yard, it was empty. No footprints, no movement. But on the kitchen counter, where I'd left my keys earlier, sat something that hadn't been there before. A folded piece of yellowed paper. Written in careful block letters were 4 words. "You're in my room." That was when I realized Caleb Rourke wasn't trying to scare me. He was trying to remind me where I was. I stopped pretending I was alone. From that night on, I spoke out loud inside the house, announcing when I entered a room, when I locked a door, when I picked something up. If Caleb Rourke was listening, and I knew he was, I wanted him to understand that I was aware of him too. The paper he left stayed on the kitchen counter. I didn't touch it. The words, "You're in my room," felt less like a threat and more like a claim. That bedroom wasn't just a space to him. It was a boundary I'd crossed without permission. I called Sheriff Tom Halverson the next morning. He arrived alone, older than I expected, with tired eyes that lingered on the house longer than necessary. I showed him the footprints, the carving, the note. He didn't argue. He just sighed and said Rourke knew that property better than anyone alive or missing. Halverson admitted they'd searched for Rourke years ago after reports of trespassing. Dogs lost the trail near the creek behind my land. No body, no evidence. The case was closed on paper, not in reality. Before leaving, the sheriff told me to keep my doors locked and my lights on. He didn't offer to stay. That evening, I found more signs. The attic hatch was open again. A chair from the kitchen had been moved beneath it. In the dust along the hallway, I saw fresh footprints, bare feet this time, leading toward my bedroom. Smaller than I expected. Precise. At 3:17 a.m., the power went out. Total blackout. The house fell into a silence so complete I could hear my own pulse in my ears. Then the breathing began, right beside my bed. Not heavy, not rushed, calm. I reached for the crowbar and felt something cold brush my wrist. A hand, dry skin, strong grip. The breathing shifted closer to my ear, and a voice whispered my name, slow and certain, like he'd practiced it. When the power came back seconds later, the room was empty. The bedroom door was wide open. On the wall above my bed, carved deep into the wood, were 5 words. I never left this house. That was the moment I understood the truth. Caleb Rourke wasn't breaking in at night. He was waking up. I didn't wait for nightfall. I packed what I could fit into my truck and drove straight to Ridgewood City Hall. Property records don't lie, even when people do. The clerk, Mary Ann Holt, pulled the file on the Rourke property and went quiet halfway through reading it. There were maintenance notes I'd never seen, dated years after the foreclosure. Someone had been accessing the house legally, or pretending to. One entry stood out. Basement access reinforced. Owner request. I'd never seen a basement door. Mary Ann said the original plans showed a storm cellar beneath the house, sealed after a structural issue. She didn't elaborate. She didn't have to. I returned to Black Hollow Road before sunset. The house felt different, like it knew I'd learned something. I found the cellar entrance behind a false wall in the laundry room, hidden beneath warped paneling. The air that came out was stale and warm, carrying the smell of old metal and sweat. The stairs led down into a narrow concrete room lit by a single bare bulb. Someone had been living there. A cot, canned food, a radio tuned permanently to static. On the wall, maps of the property were pinned with red markings, sightlines, blind spots, timings. My timings. Every mark lined up with 3:17 a.m. There were photographs taped beside the maps, me unloading boxes, me checking the locks, me sleeping, taken through the bedroom window. My stomach turned when I realized how close the camera had been. He hadn't just been watching the house. He'd been studying me. Behind the cot was a second door. Older, steel reinforced, scratched deep around the handle. When I opened it, I found a tunnel leading out toward the tree line, an escape route, a way in and out without ever using a door or window. Caleb Rourke hadn't lost his home. He'd adapted it. The radio crackled suddenly, not static anymore. A voice pushed through, calm and familiar. "You shouldn't be down there, Elias." Hearing my name spoken from inside the walls snapped something loose in me. This wasn't a haunting. This was occupation. Footsteps sounded above me. Slow, deliberate. The breathing followed, echoing down the stairwell. I backed into the cellar, crowbar raised, heart hammering. The light flickered once, then steadied. From the top of the stairs, Rourke spoke again. "You sleep in my wife's room," he said. "You walk my land. You wake up when I do." His shadow stretched down the wall, long and thin, exactly where it had been every night at 3:17 a.m. That was the point where the story changed. Not because I was scared, but because I finally understood the rules. Caleb Rourke wasn't stalking me. He was enforcing boundaries. I didn't run from the cellar. I climbed the stairs slowly, step by step, crowbar lowered, but ready. When I reached the laundry room, it was empty. No footsteps, no breathing, just the hum of the refrigerator and the soft creak of the house settling back into itself like nothing had happened. That night, I didn't sleep in the bedroom. I sat in the living room with my back against the wall, shotgun across my knees, every light in the house on. Midnight passed. 2 o'clock passed. For the first time since I moved in, 3:17 a.m. came and went in silence. No breathing, no movement. It felt wrong, like the quiet before a correction. At dawn, I found the first change. The bedroom door was closed. I never closed it. On the handle hung an old brass key, tied with frayed twine. It wasn't one of mine. Etched into the bow were the initials CR. The message was clear: access granted, temporarily. I spent the day sealing the cellar door, blocking the tunnel entrance with concrete bags and scrap lumber. By evening, my hands were shaking from exhaustion. I told myself it was over, that I'd taken control. I was wrong to think control mattered. The breathing returned that night. Not at the window, not in the hall. It came from inside the walls, moving, circling, following the old paths the house remembered. At 3:17 a.m., a knock sounded on the bedroom door. One knock, polite, patient. "I let you stay," Rourke said through the wood. His voice was calm, almost tired. "You don't change things. You don't block doors." The knob turned slowly, stopping just short of opening. "That's the agreement." I didn't answer. I stood there with the shotgun raised, heart pounding so hard it hurt. The breathing lingered for a long moment, then faded away, retreating deeper into the house, toward the cellar, toward the tunnels I thought I'd sealed. In the morning, the concrete bags were torn open, the lumber stacked neatly beside the wall, as if to show me how easily my work could be undone. On the cellar door, carved deep enough to splinter the wood, were 3 new words. "This is temporary." That evening, I packed my truck again. But this time, I didn't load everything. I left the bedroom untouched, left the cellar door unlocked, left the brass key hanging where he'd put it. At 3:17 a.m., the breathing stopped for good. I still live on Black Hollow Road. I don't use that bedroom. And every night, I lock the door to his side of the house. Because Caleb Rourke doesn't want me gone. He just wants me to remember whose home it is. I've lived with the rules long enough to know they don't change. The house on Black Hollow Road doesn't feel abandoned anymore, and it never truly was. Every creak has meaning now. Every silence is deliberate. I don't cross certain lines, and in return, the breathing doesn't come back. That's the balance Caleb Rourke wanted, and the one I accepted. People in Ridgewood still avoid the road at night. They say the woods feel wrong, like something is awake when it shouldn't be. I don't correct them. I don't explain that nothing followed me here. Something was already waiting. The land remembers him, and so does the house. I'm just the one who listens. Sometimes, at exactly 3:17 a.m., I wake up without knowing why. There's no sound, no movement. But I can feel it, the same awareness that pulled me from sleep the first night. Not threat, not fear. Presence, like someone making sure things are the way they should be. The bedroom remains untouched. Dust settles where no one walks. The cellar door stays unlocked. I learned that resistance invites attention, and attention invites correction. This isn't a warning anymore. It's an understanding. If you're listening to this right now, pay attention to the places you choose to live. Houses don't forget. Land doesn't forgive. And some people never leave, not because they can't, but because they refuse to. If this story held you until the end, subscribe to the channel. Share where you're watching from in the comments. And tonight, when you wake up for no reason at all, check the time. If it's 3:17 a.m., listen carefully. You might not be alone.